Hi, I'm Dr. Don Deems, and I'm very happy to be here with you. I first want to say how grateful I am to be a part of this program, especially to Dr. Bill Waltham and to Baylor College of Dentistry, my alma mater. Today's topic, or this particular session's topic, is about conflict resolution. And there's one thing I want to say to you about conflict resolution, and I don't want you to forget it, and I'm going to say it several times. And it's this. The key to happiness and success in life is your ability to resolve conflict in a positive way. Okay? That's how big this is. When I work with doctors and teams, they may be pretty good communicators and things like that. But in dealing with conflict, they come to a dead halt, okay? Conflict in life is inevitable. It's inevitable in your practice. It's going to happen, okay? So that's why this is such a critical and important topic. And what I want to do with you today is to help you understand everybody knows what conflict is, but what's conflict and how are the ways that people approach conflict, but what are ways that we can productively and proactively resolve conflict? So if you can get that and use this as a launching pad for your own discovery of resolving conflict, you're going to experience much more happiness and success in all that you do. Especially your practice, but also in your personal life, okay? So I hope that has your attention, and so let's get on with the program, okay? So the first thing is, conflict is not when we're going to sit down and duke it out. Many times people look at conflict that way, and so they just want to avoid it. Well, they many times will just walk around it like it's the elephant in the rug, right? It's something that we don't want to talk about, so let's pretend it doesn't exist. So therefore, the conflict happens, right? And it's the proverbial elephant in the rug. Imagine a large elephant sitting in the middle of your staff room at your office, your conference room, your team meeting room, whatever you want to call it, and it's sitting there and everybody's pretending it doesn't exist, okay? So that's not a healthy way of dealing with things. And in fact, it can become so large and such a terrible thing that it becomes what feels like an insurmountable object to overcome. And the energy that it takes every day to deal with that conflict is exhausting. It's exhausting. So let's delve into conflict, all right? And the reason that we want to do that is because, like many of the things that I've talked about in previous programs, dealing with conflict is not something that you're taught. I didn't remember taking a class in that in grade school, in high school, in college, or in dental school. So many times for all of us, it's like literally the blind leading the blind to how do we work this out. And so people develop different strategies for doing that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that so that you at least can try to answer the questions that may come up and that you have a way of beginning to learn about that. I do want to say too that there are a lot of great books available on learning how to resolve conflict, okay? Why? Well, conflict is it's a part of life. And it's a part of practice. I would encourage you to pick up a book like that and read it. I'd encourage you to work with your team on that. It's a real struggle for most team members in practices and for most doctors for that matter. So without further ado, let's go into this. So what is conflict? Well, I think we can all say, well, we have an idea of what conflict is, but the thing that, again, because I want to pound this into your head, is that your ability to handle conflict positively is one of the primary determinants of your success in life and in work. Okay? I just want you to memorize that and remember that, okay? So, how does conflict happen in teams? Well, it happens in a variety of ways. For one, teams can't work together long without disagreements. It's just going to happen. The more team members that you have, the more conflicts that are going to come about. There is just going to be disagreement that happens for one reason or another. And not even intentionally, it just happens, okay? So understand that you're going to be dealing with conflict with your team. And somebody's going to do something that makes somebody else mad, or somebody's not following through on something, or whatever the case may be. But there's going to be conflict. The other thing is that besides it happening in life in general, I mean, it happens in dental practices with a lot of regularity. My opinion for that is not because people that work in dental practices are problematic people. It's just that we work in such close proximity, and we also work in a relatively high stress environment. People that come to us have a lot of fears and concerns and issues about things that weigh on us. They will often hold us back, and they just so sometimes we just don't have a way to vent, and we end up doing it, and that can result in conflict. The other thing that I would say to you is about that these disagreements, which may start out as being relatively small, can really become serious and end up in loss of employees, or worst case scenario, even in lawsuits. Okay, so your ability to deal with this positively, you know how the rest of it goes, right? So let's get with that. Now, what are the sources of team conflicts? What are the sources of team conflicts in a practice? Well, there's several different kinds. Some of these include disagreements about individual performance. Somebody doesn't feel somebody's pulling their own weight, for example. That's a very common thing to see happen. Another one is that people are not sure what they're supposed to be doing, and so they don't do it, and that becomes problematic. People get mad at each other over things like that. That's problematic. Sometimes individual goals are in conflict with what the goals of the practice or the team goals are. So that is a source of conflict. It may be, for example, a simple example of that might be a hygienist who is working in your practice, who is paid based on commission, and she's more interested in how many people can she run through the hygiene department, and how much stuff can she do to them that's not consistent with the goals and philosophy of the practice, for example. So that would be a simple example, and there's certainly others. Another one is differences in basic beliefs about anything from just life in general, or what the practice is trying to accomplish. It's very important that the doctor is the leader in all this and is able to share with the team what's important, what the philosophy of his care is, what we're trying to accomplish, etc., and that he is the leader in that. But these basic beliefs can extend quite simply in the break room or lunch room or something like that, over at lunch, when people begin talking about politics, for example, or religion, two very hot topics, right, which can lead to some conflict, or judgment about something that's going on in somebody's life. So there's this infinite source of conflicts in a practice, in a business, etc. There are certainly personal clashes that people have for one reason or another. And again, that seems to almost be infinite. And it'll be some of the silliest stuff maybe that you've ever seen, but you're going to see it. And how you can lead your team and teach them the skills to handle this is very important. Leaving it up to them to handle it is a tactic that many doctors choose to do, and I will go ahead and tell you that it is very unproductive. Okay, part of being able to share with your team about conflict resolution skills is watching this program and continuing to learn more about it so that you can do something about it in your practice. Okay? So conflict seems so destructive, right? I mean, it just seems like conflict is such a bad thing. You know, the work gets done by some, but you know, stops the efforts of others. Another thing is that conflict eats away at cooperation and trust, or there is retaliation in form of sabotage, you know, backstabbing. You hear about that a lot. Over the years, as I've had employees in my practice, one of their main complaints is, you know, there's so much backstabbing that goes on in this practice that I just couldn't stand being there anymore. And that's a really unfortunate thing, you know, especially when the doctor is not actively engaging in it, or there's no skill development in handling this. Because this is not just a life skill, but it's a work skill to handle. Certainly another source of conflict that can be very destructive is that between patients and the office. Maybe there's a confusion or a mistake on a statement, an account that involves money. If there's one thing that's you know, more near and dear to the heart than anything else for people is money. And so a mistake on money or insurance or something like that can you know, quickly cause conflict in a practice. And the staff ability, your team members' ability to handle that is really critical, not just to not ruin their day, but also, you know, retention of the client, and maintaining a good relationship with them. Okay. Now, believe it or not, there are some aspects, positive aspects of conflict. Many times out of conflict, there comes new approaches or solutions to things that come up, so that a new way of resolving something or making it better actually comes out of it. You know, conflict's not always a bad thing, but it just seems that way many times. In fact, a lot of people don't even want to say the word or acknowledge it, but it's going to happen. Another positive conflict is that many long-standing problems are often brought out in the open. Finally, you know, we don't sweep it under the rug, or we don't walk around it like the elephant on the rug. So these are some positive aspects. Another very important positive aspect is that of clarifying thoughts and feelings about things. And when I say things, it can include anything from how we work together as a team to what we're doing as a team, what our goals are, how we work together individually, etc. Okay? So conflict is a catalyst often for very positive change in a practice. So it's not to be feared. It's going to happen. And those that fear conflict, their world gets smaller and smaller. And in your practice and in your life, so will your patient base, and you'll have a lot of turnover too. So you want to avoid that for sure. Another positive aspect that comes to my mind is stretching personal and team capabilities. Maybe people not realizing that they can actually do things that they didn't think that they could do. That's huge for their feeling of commitment and of contribution to the team. So when conflict can come about, it often opens up new opportunities. So this stretching is about those opportunities. So remember that whether conflict is positive or negative depends on how the team generally handles its conflicts. It's no surprise, I don't think, to you that most teams handle conflict very negatively. That's no big surprise. I don't think people say, "Ooh, let's have some conflict today." I don't think they do that. In fact, I think they do exactly the opposite. You know, I don't want to bring it up because it's going to cause conflict. You know, and even with my own team, you know, it's something that we have to talk about and address and work through. And so, my ability as a leader in my team is very important with that. And I find this true for most doctors. So be aware that learning these type of skills is important. And I'm going to give you some things, as I promised, here as we go along. So there are these things called team strategies, okay, that people take in terms of conflict. So when we look at a team, of course, we're talking first about individuals, and I want to look at the 5 ways, and I think these are all make sense to you. And you say, yes, well, maybe you haven't, but yes, I've done all these at one time or another. So what are the 5 ways that individuals, confront conflict? Well, the first one is forcing, right? It's my way or the highway. You know, you're going to do it. Damn the torpedoes, whatever you might want to say, but it's pushing the issue till you get your way. So that may be a way that you've used in the past for certain things. Maybe the only way that you deal with conflict. Another one is called withdrawing. Withdrawing is just slinking away from it and just ignoring it and going on and doing something else. Withdrawing is this way of dealing with conflict that I think you intuitively know that it is not very effective, okay? The next one that's common is something called smoothing. This happens an awful lot, especially in dentistry, because most people that work in dentistry want everybody to get along, okay? That's the predominant personality that shows up in a dental practice. And so smoothing is a way to try to make everything okay. You know, I want to make everything okay, so I'm not going to say anything to rock the boat. But as you would guess, in the long haul, you know, that conflict is still there in that person. And so ultimately, when it builds up to a certain point, they're going to leave. And that's unfortunate, right? The next way that people typically handle conflict is compromising. I think that's probably about the second most common way, and that's, okay, if I do this and you do this, then we both gotten a little bit. That way also is not very effective in the long run, because besides each person getting a little bit, each person is also losing a little bit. So that may bring up the question for you, well, what about how would you ever make it where conflict is a win-win? So pay attention. The next way is problem solving. It's sitting down and trying to figure out what the problem is and coming up with some solutions. As you might guess, that's a much more effective way of dealing with conflict, okay? Now, as I said, these are called styles, all right? 5 conflicts that teams use are very similar. The first one is integrating. Integrating is where the team comes together and they are going to work through these issues. And I'm going to go through how you go about doing that. It's the single best way of resolving conflict with a team. One commonly used one, though, is just like people as individuals, as teams in resolving conflict, is compromise. Okay. Again, I mentioned that everybody wins a little and everybody loses a little. The winning part is great, but the part that really bothers me, and it bothers the people that it happens to, is the losing part. You know, any kind of losing is not good at all, because it's always going to be there, and it will erode away at the person's sense of worth and well-being, especially with the team. The next way that teams often deal with conflict is competing. It's showing that I'm smarter, or I'm better, or I'm faster, or I'm, quicker at recognizing this, or I'm more proficient at this than you are, so therefore I should be able to do this, or something like that. That way of dealing with conflict, as you might imagine, is quite destructive, and there is definitely a loser on that. And that means the person will probably leave the practice, and you'll never exactly know why. They'll just say, I'm going to work somewhere else. And you're like, what happened? And they're going to say nothing. Because they don't know how to deal with the conflict, okay? And so that's what happened. Another way, which was I mentioned with personal, though, is smoothing, where because most people in a dental practice are kind of let's make everybody happy, including the doctors. I mean, dentists have, for the most part, personality styles, which are we want everybody to get along and be happy and stuff like that. So you don't want to deal with the conflict head on in a productive and positive way. So smoothing is making sure everything is going to work together okay. And then last is another similar one, which is avoiding. Okay, similar to what I mentioned earlier. It's the elephant in the rug, right? Avoiding. So I think that's pretty obvious. If you just avoid, nothing is going to happen. So these are called strategies, and so that's important to remember. Now, I want to go into a little bit more detail about these team ones, because this is really what it's about for you as a dentist and as a leader of your practice. So integrating means that the goals of both parties are refocused into one satisfying outcome. So both parties, for conflict to happen, A has to be in conflict over something with B, okay, A and B. So in this situation, the goals of both parties are refocused. In compromising, one party gives in to another, but both have stopped short. In other words, there is loss for both people, okay, involved in this. In competing, there is the obvious, I'm going to win and you're the loser, all right? So that's very ineffective. Smoothing, we're just going to give in and just kind of gloss this over, all right? Very common in a dental practice and very ineffective. Avoiding is we're just really not going to talk about this, okay? In fact, I've got something I've got to go over and do in the lab, and I'm leaving right now. So we don't want that to happen. So what I want to do is look at this in another way, okay? So let's say we have person A who doesn't confront, right? So they can avoid, which is obviously a lose-lose, right? Or they typically will want to smooth. So that's where they try to create some harmony, all right? In another situation where B does confront, for example, they can compete, right? Where we have a win-lose scenario. The other way for a does confront issue is compromising. And the compromising, of course, is where nobody wins. I mean, everybody wins a little bit of something, but everybody also loses something. And then integrating, right, which is the way of dealing with confrontation, is actually a win-win, right? So imagine confrontation being a win-win. Well, it can be, and let me show you how. So when we're integrating, we face our conflicts, okay? That's very important. Excuse me while I go back just a second. And we view conflicts as problems that need to be solved, all right? So we say, okay, one very important concept I want you to hopefully get about resolving conflicts is to depersonalize whatever the conflict is, okay? Don't use somebody's name and don't use you or point your finger or something like that. But view it as a problem. Okay, team, we have a problem here. How can we work together to resolve this? And so there is a procedure for doing it. I'm going to give it to you. In compromising, again, what we're looking at is we find ways to meet each other halfway. So am I getting this into you? That the compromising is not very effective. Because really, no one needs to give up anything. Nobody needs to give up anything. It's just, if you do that, there's just a part of you that's always gone. When in reality, everyone needs to get something and should get something, and there should never be anybody who is at a shortness of something like that. Okay? So we want to look for the win-win. The compromising, because there is that win component, often gets confused with the integrating style of team dealing with conflict. Okay, so I would ask you, which I'm not going to be able to get your feedback, but why does compromising fail in the long run? From what I've said, I think you could go ahead and answer that question, and the answer to that is, well, because there's still a losing component to all this. So we don't want to have that losing component, all right? In competing with teams, team members, and sometimes, the leader of the team, also known as you, use rank, seniority, or other forms of leverage to suppress disagreements. If you have an office manager, they may say, well, I'm the office manager, so it's going to be this way. Or you may have a dental hygienist who's been with you for 10 years, and there's a younger hygienist who's been with you for 3 years. She goes, well, I've been here longer than you, so this is the way that we're going to do it. Okay? Obviously, you can see that that's not going to work very well. This will destroy the team in the long run. And if I were here talking to you, I'd ask you why, and you would be able to tell me, right? And it's because somebody wins and somebody loses. And the loser will eventually go away. In fact, they might start looking for a new job pretty quickly, and as soon as they find it, they'll give you your notice and move right into the new job. So I hope that doesn't happen to you. The smoothing, and I'm going through these because I want you to be very familiar with these. In the smoothing approach to this, we place group harmony and solidarity above everything else. We all want to get along. We want to be one big happy family. All right? Not going to happen. All right? Because it's just this, we're going to sweep it all under the rug. And in fact, when disagreements arise, a lot of times we'll end up joking things away. Like, oh, yeah, that's no big deal. I didn't really mean that. That sort of stuff. It's not helpful. It is not helpful. All right? So the underlying conflict still exists, and so then what happens? Well, nothing happens, does it? It just still exists, and in fact, it just adds to the debris that is all over the floor. In fact, sometimes that debris is so palpable and so evident, it's like people are walking on eggshells everywhere they go. You've heard that phrase, walking on eggshells. So it's not an effective way of dealing with conflict. And avoiding certainly is just saying that, well, we just don't talk about stuff like that. And it's very dysfunctional for teams to be that way. Nothing happens, nothing changes, because conflict has its very positive aspects, and it's going to happen. So why can't we deal with this in a very important and strategic way, right? So if we do this, there's a lot of this pretending, and pretending does not help. Doesn't help anything. It's the cause of marriages failing, other relationships failing, certainly things with our patients failing, and of course team members, resulting in turnover and dissatisfaction, and a team that is all smiling at each other and pretending that we're one big happy family. When I do retreats with offices and everybody's there and they're all smiling and saying they're one big happy family, I go, oh my gosh, I know what I'm in for. But that's the way it goes, okay? So you can do a lot for your practice by learning how to deal with this, okay? So, avoiding, also known as withdrawing, all right? All right, so I've answered the question which I would ask you is, this leads to more tension in the long run and the short run, and why, okay? Because nothing gets resolved. It's just that simple. So I want to spend this time on this resolution procedure. And so we spent some time looking at what are positive and negative aspects of conflict. What's the value of us being able to deal with conflict? What do we see as styles and strategies that are used in conflict, and what are the consequences of all these styles and strategies? So now we want to talk about what can we do, okay? And this is, the integrating aspect, the one where it is a win-win. So let's look at this rather closely, okay? This resolution procedure. Okay, in the first step, someone should open the discussion with an I message. That means I. So somebody might say, I am upset that we are not working well as a team. Not everybody is pulling their fair share or getting the job done, and it is interfering with our productivity. Okay? Now, step 2 is to jointly, which means as a team, clarify this issue that's starting this disagreement that the person who brought it up has. Okay? So, it might be, okay, you as a leader say, okay, so Susan brought up the issue around people pulling their fair share. So let's kind of clarify that. What are we talking about when we talk about pulling our fair share? What does that mean? And get the team to begin to talk about that and clarify what's going on, okay? And so, initially people may have all kinds of excuses about why this is happening or why they're not getting this done, or some people are going to take it very personally, all right? But move it towards depersonalization and looking at what is the focus of the practice. What are we trying to accomplish as a team? So jointly, which means with the team, clarify what everybody sees as the issue, okay? So get an agreement on that. Then you want to decide what is the result that we want. Well, in my really simple example, the result might be is that we want everybody to do their own job. We want everybody to pull their fair share, etc. So that might be just really, in my simple example, that might be all that you decide on, okay? Now, the next step that's very important is we know what the result is that we're looking for, And it may look like, oh, we solved it. Well, we want to brainstorm alternatives. There's probably a good reason, for example, that, that things aren't getting done. People don't work in positions in offices to get fired. People work at an office because they want a job, they want to be a part of a team. They're not trying to get fired. At least I can't imagine that somebody would. I suppose everything has an exception, but nobody's doing that. So something is going wrong, and so this next step, which is really crucial, is brainstorming alternatives. So this is where you start brainstorming, and as the leader of the practice, you want to set what are the rules for brainstorming. Well, simple rules for brainstorming is that no idea is a bad idea. Every idea is valid. We're going to consider all ideas, and there'll be and we don't want any censoring, okay, which means we don't hold back on what your idea is, even if you think that it's kind of ridiculous. So we get all those out there. I suggest that you put up an easel or have something that you can write on that everybody can see, and prompt with open-ended questions, what are the ways that we can resolve these issues or this issue at bay, and come up with all these different alternatives, okay? You'll be surprised at what may come to light that you had no idea was going on. In fact, that will be more of the rule than the exception. Then the last part, is tentatively select, it's next to the last part, tentatively select the best solution for the problem. So that doesn't mean you, that means the team. So, okay, women, gals, guys, team, whatever you want to call them, all right, so here's our alternatives. What do we think is the best solution for this problem, right? What's the best solution? And so if we, what do you think? And we begin talking it out, all right? And so we see that, okay, there can be some different things going on that are going to be very helpful. And these might include maybe a change of a job description, or change up how certain things are done in the office, all right? So one person is not overwhelmed or overloaded and they can't get things done, which may be causing the conflict. Or maybe realize that there's more training in some area that needs to take place, okay? I mean, people don't invent conflict, generally speaking, so you want to tentatively schedule. Why do I not say definitively? Well, because you want to do the next step, which is you want to set a date for review of the selected option. In other words, you want to say, okay, what can we all agree on doing? And you agree on doing it, and then you say, let's look at this again next month and see how it's working, okay? And so hopefully your first choice will work out very well. If it doesn't, you can go through the same exact process of figuring this out. Now, if I were listening to me right now, I might think, this sounds like a really long drawn out piece of malarkey that why can't I just tell them what to do, or why do we have to even go through the trouble? I'm going to repeat what I said again. Your ability to resolve conflict in a positive way is the key to your success and happiness in life and in your practice, okay? So that's why this is important. At first it may seem very rigid, like I've got to do blah, 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 but soon it will become more second nature. And so the teams that are able to handle conflict productively as a team and come up with solutions are going to be the teams that work together best, that are happiest, that everybody feels like they're a part of the team and fulfilled, okay? That's why this is so doggone important, okay? That's why it's so, so important. So these steps, start the discussion with an I statement. with somebody. It might be you that starts the discussion. Jointly clarify the issue, right? That's causing disagreement. Then decide on what is the result that we would like to see. Then brainstorm all the decisions. Make a decision on which one sounds like the best way to approach this. And then look at it again, say a month or so down the road, whatever seems appropriate. It might be 2 weeks, it might be a week, whatever feels like it's appropriate to do, okay? So Jack Welch, a writer, said, an organization's ability to learn and translate that learning into action rapidly is the ultimate competitive advantage. I mean, I want you to really get that. So let's substitute your practice's ability to learn and translate that learning into action rapidly is the ultimate competitive advantage. And the way that you're going to do that, one of the ways that you're going to do that, is through resolving conflict, because conflict happens, and your ability to lead your team through this and teach them this is going to make a huge difference in the way they deal with patients, the way they deal with each other, the way they work with you, etc. Okay? So, my wishes for you are that you use this primer on resolving conflict, that you take to heart the fact that this is something that does need my attention. It may be something that you never thought of that would need such big attention, but it does, because it happens. And if you just look around in businesses, in organizations, and everywhere, conflict is everywhere. And if you can develop that skill to lead people through resolving conflict, you're of huge value. And if you're the owner of the business, it's also of tremendous value to you and your bottom line to be able to do that. So I wish you the very best. Thank you for your time again today.